So imagine your boss pulls you into their office, right? And they give you, like, the most crucial career-saving advice you have ever received.
Okay, sounds good so far.
Right. It's the exact insight you need to get that promotion you've been chasing for years. But there's just one problem. They absolutely scream it at you.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that changes things.
Totally. They deliver it in front of all your colleagues. Their tone is super condescending, and they even throw in this, like, really unfavorable comparison to your biggest rival at the company, just for good measure. So, do you take the advice, or do you just fight back against the disrespect?
I mean, that is the ultimate test of, our professional and personal maturity.
Mm.
And the reality is, almost all of us fight back.
Yeah, we get defensive.
Exactly.
Mm.
We completely reject the life-saving insight just because the delivery mechanism was so abrasive.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. I'm so glad you're here with us. Okay, let's unpack this because I feel like we've all outgrown that standard feedback sandwich by now, right?
Oh, definitely. The whole, compliment, criticism, compliment thing.
Yeah. And the corporate world is just flooded with seminars on how to give feedback. But today, our mission is a little different. We're looking at a fascinating article by Dr. Joel Wong from Psychology Today. It's called Seven Strategies to Embrace Criticism as a Gift. And it totally flips the dynamic.
Literally does.
Because today is all about how we receive feedback. And honestly, it's kind of like taking medicine. We all know we need it to get better, but if it tastes terrible, our first instinct is to just spit it right back out.
That is such a perfect analogy because receiving feedback, it actually requires overriding millions of years of human evolution.
Really?
Evolution.
Yeah. Researchers Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen have done some really fascinating work on this. They outline what they call this core human contradiction. Basically, we are driven by two deeply conflicting psychological needs.
What are they?
Well, on one hand, we have this profound drive to learn and master our environment. But at the exact same time, we have this desperate, like, survival level need for acceptance, approval, and just a recognized sense of competence. Ah, I see. So if we think about that from an evolutionary standpoint, that actually makes total sense. Like, if the tribe thinks you're incompetent, you get left behind.
Right. You don't survive.
Wow. So when someone criticizes us, they aren't just giving us a helpful tip. They're triggering this primal alarm that says, your status in the tribe is currently threatened.
Yes. That tension is exactly why criticism hurts so much. When someone points out a flaw, the brain literally interprets it as a threat to our social survival. So that drive to learn is completely hijacked by the drive to defend our competence.
It makes me think about adjusting the mirrors in a car. Like when a driving instructor reaches over and tweaks your rearview mirror to expose a blind spot, they aren't insulting your driving.
No, not at all.
They're showing you a massive truck that is hurtling toward your blind side. But when it comes to personal feedback, instead of looking at the truck, we get deeply offended that someone touched our mirror.
We really do.
We take it as this massive attack on our identity as a driver.
And that dynamic is exactly why Dr. Wong introduces what he calls the critical feedback matrix.
Yeah.
Because if we're going to stop taking offense at people adjusting our mirrors, we need a reliable system to categorize the criticism we receive.
Okay, so how does this matrix work?
So he plots feedback along two different dimensions. The first is helpfulness. So basically, does the information actually provide a path to improvement?
Right.
And the second dimension is care. Is the delivery compassionate or is it harsh?
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because I found myself pausing at that exact point in the article. Intuitively, we tend to link those two things together, don't we?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, I assume that if someone cares about me, their advice is automatically helpful. And conversely, if someone is being a jerk, I just assume their advice is useless. Like, aren't helpful and caring basically the exact same thing when it comes to advice?
They aren't, actually. And separating those two dimensions is like the first major psychological hurdle. By plotting helpfulness against care, we end up with four distinct quadrants of feedback.
Okay, break them down for me.
Let's start with the ideal scenario, which is the top right quadrant. He calls this compassionate clarity.
Compassionate clarity. I like the sound of that.
It's the gold standard. This is feedback that is both highly actionable and delivered with genuine care for your well-being.
The holy grail of feedback. And the author shares this really compelling real-life story to illustrate this, right?
Yeah, it's a great example. So 20 years ago, Dr. Wong was a graduate student, and his practicum supervisor, this guy named Carlos, was reviewing his CV.
Right.
And Carlos noticed that the author's name at the very top of the resume was printed in this massive oversized font.
Like taking up half the page kind of thing.
Exactly. But the way Carlos handles this is just a masterclass. He doesn't say, you need to fix this because it makes you look like a total narcissist.
Right, because that attacks the identity.
Exactly. Instead, Carlos points to the font and gently suggests that other people might perceive it as narcissistic, and he just recommends sizing it down a bit.
Oh, that's so smart. He externalized the threat. He didn't diagnose the author's character. He diagnosed the perception of the audience.
Yes.
He adjusted the mirror so the author could see the blind spot, but he did it in a way that made it clear they were both sitting in the same car, looking at the same problem.
That is compassionate clarity at its absolute finest.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, we don't always get that. If we slide down to the bottom right quadrant, we hit the scenario you open the show with.
Oh, right. Brutal clarity.
Exactly.
Ugh.
Helpful, but entirely uncaring. The information has objective value, but the delivery is just awful. Like the boss screaming career-saving advice in front of the whole office.
Man, processing brutal clarity is like panning for gold in muddy water. You have to, force yourself to filter out all the gross, muddy water, the harsh tone, the yelling, just to find that one tiny nugget of gold, which is the actionable growth point.
That's a great way to put it. And, many people just refuse to pan for the gold. They throw the muddy water back and lose the gold with it.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
But then, if we look at the unhelpful side of the matrix, the top left quadrant is what he calls empty critique.
Empty critique. So this is caring but unhelpful.
Precisely. It's incredibly caring, but practically useless. It's that diluted, overly softened corporate jargon, like when your manager says, "You're doing great, you bring such good energy to the team, just keep doing what you're doing."
Oh my gosh, I'd actually argue that empty critique is sometimes more dangerous than brutal clarity.
Really? How so?
Well, brutal clarity hurts your feelings, obviously. But empty critique actively lulls you into a false sense of security. Like, you think you're on track for a promotion because your manager is always smiling and telling you to just keep being you.
Right.
And then you get completely blindsided when someone else gets the job.
Exactly. That starves you of the actual data you need to grow. And then finally, in the bottom left quadrant, we have the absolute worst one. Empty negativity.
Oh boy. Unhelpful and uncaring.
Pure toxicity. It's a personal attack, a troll on the internet, or just a manager who likes to berate people to exert control, offering absolutely zero tangible suggestions for improvement.
Okay, so since we don't live in a perfect world and we aren't always lucky enough to get Carlos-level compassionate clarity, we're mostly forced to navigate brutal clarity or empty critique.
Sadly, yes.
So how are we supposed to process those lower quadrants, especially when the delivery is just awful?
Well, the article's first strategy for surviving this is learning to separate the message from the messenger. And this requires a really massive shift in how we measure the value of a critique.
Okay.
What's fascinating here is how our emotions distort our perception. When we get hit with harsh feedback, our immediate instinct is to put on our little defense attorney suit and ask, wait, is this objectively true?
Oh, 100%. We want to litigate the facts. Like if a colleague says, we dominate meetings and we never listen, we immediately start tallying up the minutes we stayed silent on Tuesday, right?
Right.
Or we point out the specific question we asked on Thursday to prove that the feedback is factually incorrect.
Exactly. But Dr. Wong argues that objective truth is actually the wrong metric. He says that helpfulness is not the same thing as truth.
Oof. That is a tough pill to swallow for anyone who values logic. Like, if I have the data proving someone's criticism is factually wrong, why shouldn't I just dismiss it?
Because in complex human dynamics, especially in relationships or team environments, data doesn't resolve ruptures. The article uses a great example of a spouse or partner.
Okay, lay it on me.
Imagine your partner tells you they feel undervalued in the relationship, and they offer specific suggestions on how you could show more appreciation.
Right, and the defense attorney instinct kicks in. I'd be like, I bought you flowers on the 14th, I paid the electric bill on the 18th, and I cooked dinner 3 times last week. So your claim that I don't value you is objectively false. Case closed.
Yeah, and the problem there is that you might win the argument, but you completely lose the relationship. Because their perception is the reality of the dynamic. Their feeling of being undervalued is the actual problem that needs solving, regardless of your spreadsheet of good deeds.
So perception matters more than objective truth in these moments.
Exactly. So the better question to ask yourself isn't, is this true? The better question is does this help me grow?
Does this help me grow? I love that. It completely neutralizes the ego. You stop fighting the messenger and you just start evaluating the utility of the message.
Exactly.
But, okay, let's get real about the biology here for a second, because it is very easy for us to sit in this comfortable studio and philosophize about ego and growth. But in the actual moment when criticism hits you, your brain undergoes a literal amygdala hijack.
Oh, the physiological response is incredibly intense.
Right. Your heart rate spikes, your vagus nerve triggers that awful dropping sensation in your stomach. The brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, literally overrides the prefrontal cortex, which is the logical reasoning part of your brain.
It just shuts it down.
Yeah. So your ability to sit there calmly and ponder, does this help me grow, is just biologically offline. So if I'm someone whose need for competence is on overdrive, or I'm like a chronic people pleaser whose self-esteem is entirely tied to performance, I'm going to short circuit. How do I physically hit the brakes?
That state of being flooded by anger, sadness, or anxiety is a very real, documented psychological event. And the best immediate response when you're flooded is to do absolutely nothing.
Just freeze.
Well, you use a specific script to buy your prefrontal cortex time to reboot. The author provides a highly effective line. When someone delivers feedback that spikes your heart rate, you just say, "You've shared some important information. I'd like to think about it and get back to you."
You've shared some important information. I'd like to think about it and get back to you.
Exactly.
That is brilliant because it acknowledges that they spoke, it validates that a transaction of information occurred, but it makes absolutely zero commitments about the validity of that information.
And it forces a pause. Time is the single most effective tool for reducing the brain's threat level and metabolizing all that cortisol and adrenaline.
Right.
By stepping away for a few hours or even a full day, you allow your nervous system to regulate. So the feedback that felt like a life or death attack on Tuesday afternoon will often look like a highly useful piece of brutal clarity by Wednesday morning.
Okay, so we use the script, we step away, and our prefrontal cortex comes back online. So what does this all mean for the unhelpful columns?
What do you mean?
Like, what if we evaluate the feedback and realize it squarely falls into empty critique like those notoriously vague corporate performance reviews we talked about, or empty negativity? Are we just stuck with useless information?
Not at all. This is where we transition from passively receiving feedback to actively taking control of the feedback loop.
Oh, I like the sound of that. How do we do that?
Dr. Wong outlines 2 strategies for this. Give feedback about the feedback and look for learning opportunities. Basically, you can actively manage your feedback provider.
Okay, how do you apply this to someone giving you empty critique? Let's say you have a boss who hates conflict, so every review is just a string of pleasantries, but you know you need to improve.
You steer them. You can say something like, "I really appreciate your support, but I tend to respond better when you share what I can do instead of what I'm not doing. What is one specific thing I could do differently next quarter?"
Oh, wow. So you are actively teaching your manager how to communicate with you.
Yes. You are pulling them out of the empty critique quadrant and dragging them into compassionate clarity.
You are literally holding their hand while they adjust your mirror. I love that. But I do want to push back on the strategy for that final quadrant. Empty negativity.
Okay, the really toxic stuff.
Yeah, the absolute worst. Unhelpful and uncaring. The article suggests we should look for learning opportunities even here. But if someone is just berating me without any valid points, why on earth should I try to extract value from a toxic interaction? Shouldn't the strategy just be to ignore it and protect my peace?
I get that. And ignoring it might protect your immediate peace, sure. But finding the meta lesson protects your future.
What do you mean by meta lesson?
Even if the content of the criticism is entirely baseless, the interaction itself contains data. If you shift your mindset from "why are they hurting me" to "what can I learn from this environment?" The gold you mine from that muddy water might simply be the realization that you are working in a fundamentally toxic culture.
Oh, so the learning opportunity is just realizing it is time to update your resume and leave.
Exactly. Or it's a masterclass in anti-leadership. You walk away thinking, "I now know exactly how a bad manager destroys morale, and I will never, ever treat someone else the way they just treated me."
Oh, that's powerful. The interaction wasn't a total loss because you weaponized their toxicity to improve your own future leadership style.
That framework makes you incredibly resilient. No interaction is wasted. You are extracting growth from every single encounter, even for people who actively want to tear you down.
Man, we've spent this entire deep dive dissecting how to neutralize bad delivery, how to navigate the amygdala hijack, and how to extract those meta lessons from toxic environments. But we need to talk about the good feedback, right?
Yes, we do. Because we actually have a severe biological disadvantage when it comes to remembering compassionate clarity.
Right, because of the negativity bias.
Exactly. Evolutionarily, we are hardwired to prioritize threats over compliments. Remembering the location of a predator was just much more important for survival than remembering, the location of a beautiful sunset.
So true. So your brain will vividly retain the exact phrasing, the tone of voice, and the facial expression of a harsh critic. Like it will keep you up at night replaying the scenario.
Mhm.
But the mentor who kindly and gently corrected your course, the brain tends to just let that fade into the background.
It does. Which is why Dr. Wong's final strategy is an active countermeasure against that bias, he says.
Okay.
Remember the bad, but honor the good.
Honor the good.
He challenges us to actively retrieve the memories of people who gave us compassionate clarity. Those rare individuals who were brave enough to tell us what we needed to hear, but kind enough to say it with care.
And he suggests going beyond just remembering them, right? He recommends actually writing a gratitude note, not just a generic thanks for your help, but a highly specific account of exactly how their feedback altered your trajectory.
And the Carlos example comes full circle here. Dr. Wong actually practiced what he preached. 20 years after Carlos gently told him to shrink the font on his resume, the author tracked him down and wrote him a letter of gratitude.
That is amazing. Think about the profound impact of that. A 2-minute conversation about font size delivered with the right mix of helpfulness and care resonated for 2 entire decades.
It fundamentally changes the relationship we have with criticism. When you actively practice gratitude for the people who adjust your mirrors, feedback transforms from this constant social threat into a really beautiful, collaborative process of growth.
That is the grand takeaway, isn't it? Personal and professional growth is nurtured by the rare people brave and kind enough to tell us what we need to hear, not just what we want to hear. If you have a Carlos in your life, they absolutely deserve that note.
They really do.
Well, we've covered the matrix, the biological hacks, and the massive shift from truth to helpfulness. But before we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a brand new, thought-provoking question to chew on.
Let's hear it.
We've spent this entire time talking about how to receive feedback from others, bosses, partners, mentors. But what about the feedback you give yourself?
Oh, wow. That's a great point.
Think about your own internal monologue right after you make a mistake. Which of those 4 quadrants, compassionate clarity, brutal clarity, empty critique, or empty negativity, is your inner voice using?
That's a heavy question.
It is, because if your inner critic was a manager, would you tolerate the way they speak to you? And maybe the biggest question of all, is it time to give your own inner critic some feedback on its feedback?